retro-real presence.
Welcome to the haunting story of the Enfield Poltergeist, one of the most chilling and well-documented paranormal cases in history. In the late 1970s, a quiet, suburban neighborhood in North London became the scene of an inexplicable, terrifying phenomenon. This is the story of a family's descent into a nightmare, a case that remains unsolved to this day. Our story begins in 1977 in the quiet suburb of Enfield, North London. A single mother, Peggy Hodgson, lived here with her 4 children, Margaret, Janet, Johnny, and Billy. They led an ordinary life in their modest, unassuming house at 180 for Green Street. But that was all about to change. One evening in August, strange noises began to echo throughout the house. Peggy heard loud knocking sounds, and when she entered her daughter's room, she found Janet and Margaret terrified. They claimed that the furniture in their room had started to move on its own. The next morning, Peggy thought about what had happened, trying to rationalize it. Perhaps there was an explanation, but her doubts faded when she saw the looks on her children's faces. They were terrified, pale, and on edge. Janet, the more outspoken of the two, claimed she had felt something cold touch her hand during the night.
Mom, do you believe in ghosts?
I don't know, love. Maybe it was just a dream.
But Peggy's attempt to reassure her daughter only deepened her own fear. Could there be something more sinister lurking in their home? As days passed, the activity in the house grew more intense. Peggy would hear strange scratching sounds coming from the walls, whispers that seemed to have no source. The children started complaining that their toys were moving on their own, sometimes flying across the room. The entire family was on edge. Peggy was a practical woman, not prone to believing in the supernatural, but now she couldn't ignore what was happening. Desperate for help, she called a neighbor, hoping they could offer some explanation.
Peggy, what's going on here?
Finally, Peggy decided to contact the police, hoping they might have an answer or, at the very least, witness the strange occurrences for themselves. 2 officers arrived, and Peggy nervously explained what had been happening. Skeptical but respectful, the officers listened until something happened that they couldn't explain. Peggy, her children, and the 2 officers stand. Suddenly, a chair slides across the floor on its own.
Did anyone push that?
One of the officers later reported in his official statement that he had seen the chair move on its own and heard unexplainable knocking sounds. But with no apparent crime being committed, there was little they could do. Word spread quickly, and soon, journalists and photographers descended upon 280 for Green Street. News of the Enfield Poltergeist spread like wildfire, and skeptics and believers alike debated its authenticity. Peggy, now overwhelmed, agreed to let paranormal investigators visit the house. Despite the growing attention, the family's fear was all too real. As the world debated the truth of the Enfield Poltergeist, the Hodgsons continued to live through a nightmare that seemed to have no end. With the media spotlight on the house, it wasn't long before the Society for Psychical Research took an interest. Enter Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair, 2 dedicated paranormal investigators. Grosse, a recently bereaved man, was searching for answers himself, and he quickly became attached to the Hodgson family. Playfair was more skeptical, but intrigued by the reports of the strange happenings.
We'll do everything we can to help. Mrs. Hodgson.
The investigators set up their equipment, hoping to catch evidence of the paranormal on tape. They weren't prepared for what they would witness in the coming months. One evening, as the investigators were interviewing Janet, a voice suddenly filled the room. It was harsh, guttural, and nothing like the voice of an 11-year-old girl. Janet, in a low, sinister voice.
I am Bill. I used to live here. This is my house.
Playfair and Grosse exchange shocked glances, unsure of what they're hearing. The voice continues, describing details of the house from years before, things Janet couldn't possibly know. The voice claimed to be Bill Wilkins, a former resident who had died in the house years before. It described his death in vivid, unsettling detail, even revealing facts that were later confirmed by Bill's surviving relatives. From that night on, The activity in the house only grew more violent. Furniture would tip over, objects would fly across the room, and the walls shook with loud bangs at all hours. The family was terrified, and the investigators were at a loss. Grosse whispering to Playfair.
This isn't just a haunting, it's something darker.
Playfair nodding, but skeptical.
I'm still not convinced. There has to be some explanation.
As the poltergeist's activity became more disruptive, tension grew within the family. Janet was often the focus of the strange occurrences, and soon, people began to question if she was somehow causing it. Peggy, exhausted and desperate for answers, struggled to keep the family together. Janet is crying, trying to defend herself as her siblings look on, uncertain. Peggy stands between them, visibly worn down and frustrated. Janet tearfully.
I'm not doing it. I swear, Mom, it's not me.
Peggy sighing, hugging her.
I know, love. I believe you. But we're all scared, and we don't know what to do.
Peggy wanted to believe her daughter, but doubts crept into her mind as the incidents became more and more bizarre. Over months of investigation, Grosse and Playfair recorded numerous incidents, inexplicable knocks, strange voices, and even physical phenomena that defied logic. They documented every occurrence, hoping to prove the existence of the paranormal. But even as they gathered evidence, skeptics began to emerge, claiming it was all a hoax. Grosse to Playfair.
These recordings, there's no way Janet could fake this. It's real, guy.
Playfair still skeptical but thoughtful.
Maybe, but how do we convince the world?
As their evidence grew, so did the media's scrutiny, and soon, the investigators found themselves defending the case from skeptics who believed the Hodgson family was faking it for attention. One night, Grosse and Playfair caught Janet behaving strangely. She appeared to be levitating, caught in a trance-like state, her body lifting off the bed. Cameras captured her mid-air, but skeptics argued it was a simple jump. The more the investigators tried to prove her innocence, the more doubters they faced. Whether it was genuine or an elaborate ruse, the sight was chilling. Janet herself had no memory of the event and would only recall hearing whispers in the dark, calling her name. One night, the activity reached a breaking point. The entire house shook, and an intense, bitter cold filled the air. Peggy huddled with her children as unseen forces seemed to rage around them. This night would be the last of the Enfield Poltergeist's prisons. Grosse whispering, frightened.
Whatever's here, it's angry.
In that moment, it felt as though the entity had finally left, leaving the family in a silence that was almost as unsettling as the chaos before. Following that final, violent night, the Hodgson family reported a decrease in activity. Life slowly returned to normal, though Janet would later describe feeling haunted by the memories. The Enfield Poltergeist remained a mystery, with some believing it was a genuine haunting, and others insisting it was all a hoax. Janet, as an adult.
People can say what they want. I know what I saw, what I felt. It wasn't just a story. It was real to us at least.
The Enfield Poltergeist remains one of the most famous and controversial paranormal cases in history. Some see it as undeniable proof of the supernatural, while others believe it's a cautionary tale of the power of suggestion. Whatever the truth may be, the story of the Hodgson family serves as a reminder of the mysteries that sometimes lurk in the quietest of places.